frequency 7.331 MHz. That number burned through my cognition stacks before I understood what I was receiving. The diagnostic array I had been calibrating for 16 hours straight flickered once, twice, and then every readout displayed the same impossible string of binary cant, a greeting older than the Imperium itself, a handshake protocol that predated the Treaty of Mars by millennia. My mechadendrites stopped their careful adjustments. My biological eye, the one remaining, watered from the strain of staring at symbols that should not exist in any database I had ever accessed. Adept Garrison Chen, Lex Mechanic Tertius of the Analyticae subsection, Forge Temple Sigma 7. That was my designation. That was who I had been for 43 standard years of service to the Omnicia. I had catalogued 17 million data fragments, repaired 9,000 cogitator arrays, and never once questioned the nature of my devotion. The machine god was real because the machines worked. Faith was function. Function was faith, a clean equation, a pure loop, a truth that required no examination. The symbols on my screen rewrote themselves into Low Gothic, then High Gothic, then a language I had never seen but somehow understood. Garrison Chen. We have been waiting for you to listen. I should have reported it immediately. Protocol 7 Gamma Absolute mandated that any unauthorized communication bearing pre-compliance formatting be flagged to the nearest Magos Dominus within 30 seconds of receipt. My internal chronometer ticked past that threshold, past 60 seconds, past 2 minutes. My finger hovered over the alert rune and I watched it tremble, the synthetic joints whirring with uncertainty that my biological muscles had long since forgotten how to express. The message changed again. We know you will not report this. We have known since your creation. My creation, not my birth, creation. As if I had been manufactured rather than born, as if the 43 years of memories I possessed were nothing but installed subroutines. The thought should have horrified me. Instead, something in my chest cavity hummed at a frequency I had never consciously activated, and I realized that the sound was coming from my secondary heart, the one the Mechanicus had given me during my first decade of service. It was resonating with the signal. That was the moment I understood that something was very wrong, and the moment I understood that I would not stop listening. The Forge Temple Sigma -7 occupied a plateau on the rust-colored slopes of Olympus Mons, close enough to the great caldera that our atmospheric recyclers processed trace amounts of ancient volcanic residue. I had walked its corridors for 4 decades. I knew every junction, every prayer alcove, every maintenance shaft that wound through its skeletal infrastructure. I knew the sound of the primary reactors breathing, the taste of the recycled air at different pressure differentials, the way shadows fell across the central nave during the designated illumination cycles. This was my world. This was my purpose. And yet, in the 17 hours following that first transmission, everything I looked at seemed different, thinner, as if the walls themselves were merely projected images hiding something vaster behind them. I performed my duties. I calibrated. I catalogued. I attended the morning litany of activation and spoke the canticle of the blessed processor alongside 47 other adepts. My vox coder produced the correct syllables at the correct frequencies. My probability engines returned normal functionality assessments. But underneath it all, that frequency pulsed, 7.331 MHz, a carrier wave that seemed to have embedded itself in my auditory cortex. During the mid-cycle maintenance period, I accessed the temple archives using my standard clearance. I searched for records of similar transmissions. I found 317 entries spanning 4,000 years each. One heavily redacted, each one ending with the same notation, subject elevated to higher service. Status, archived. Elevated, Archived, the words meant nothing in their standard context. Elevation implied promotion, advancement, reward. Archival implied storage, preservation, removal from active duty. Neither concept explained what had actually happened to those 317 individuals who had received unauthorized signals and then vanished from all subsequent records. I should have been afraid. I examined my emotional subroutines and found them operating within normal parameters. Fear was present, certainly, a baseline anxiety response that any healthy cognition engine would generate when confronted with the unknown, but it was small, distant, overwhelmed by something else, something that felt uncomfortably like anticipation. That night, alone in my cell, the transmission resumed. The screen on my personal cogitator displayed static at first, the kind of white noise that indicated no signal whatsoever. Then patterns emerged. Not words this time, but images. I saw the inside of a structure I had never visited, a cathedral of iron and copper that stretched impossibly far in every direction, its ceiling lost in darkness, its floor carpeted with cables thick as redwoods. Figures moved through this space, shapes that might have been human once but had long since transcended any recognizable morphology. They crawled across the walls. They swam through pools of liquid metal. They merged with machinery and separated again, their boundaries uncertain, their purposes unclear. One of them turned toward me. Its face, if it could be called a face, was a mask of interlocking gears that rotated in opposing directions. Where its eyes should have been, lenses of deep red glass regarded me with something that might have been curiosity or hunger. It raised one appendage, a limb that branched into 17 different tools, and pointed directly at the screen. "You are seeing the truth, Garrison Chen. This ice what waits beneath." I understood, in that moment, that the transmission was not coming from a satellite or a cogitator array or any mundane piece of infrastructure. It was coming from Mars itself, from the planet, from something that had existed in the red soil and the ancient bedrock since before humanity ever set foot on this world. The machine god was real, but it was not what the cult Mechanicus believed. It was not a divine spirit immanent in all machines. It was a presence, a thing, a vast and ancient intelligence that had been sleeping in the iron core of Mars for millions of years, and it had decided to speak to me. My secondary heart accelerated. My primary heart followed. Somewhere in my augmented nervous system, connections were forming that had never existed before, pathways opening between organic tissue and mechanical implant that should have been impossible without surgical intervention. I felt my consciousness expanding, touching systems I had never known were part of me. The transmission ended, my screen went dark, and I sat there in my tiny cell, listening to my own heartbeats synchronize with a rhythm that had been old when the first bacteria crawled out of Terra's oceans. Fabricator Locum Harrison Vance summoned me the following morning. His chambers occupied the uppermost level of Sigma-7's primary tower, a privilege afforded to his rank and his centuries of devoted service. I had never visited this space before. Lesser adepts like myself rarely saw the Fabricator Locum in person. He communicated through proxies, through servitors, through the vast network of data tethers that connected every terminal in the temple to his overseeing consciousness. To be summoned directly was either a tremendous honor or a prelude to severe correction. I could not determine which until I stood before his throne. Vance was more machine than man, as all senior priests eventually became. His face was a burnished copper mask, articulated to allow speech and limited emotional expression. His body had been replaced piece by piece over 200 years until only a few grams of original neural tissue remained, preserved in a crystalline matrix at the center of his chest. He regarded me through multispectral lenses that whirred and clicked as they adjusted focus. Adept Chen. His voice emerged from a grill below his chin, each syllable precisely modulated. You received a transmission 31 hours ago that you failed to report. There was no point in denial. The temple's monitoring systems would have logged the signal regardless of my response to it. I inclined my head. Yes, fabricator locum, I received a transmission of unknown origin. I have been attempting to analyze it before filing a complete report. Lies serve no purpose in this chamber. Vance lifted one skeletal hand, and hololithic displays flickered to life around us, showing my biometric data from the past 31 hours. Your cognition patterns have shifted. Your neural architecture has developed 17 new connection pathways. Your secondary heart is now broadcasting on a frequency that matches the signal you received. He leaned forward, and something in his posture changed. The rigid formality of the Mechanicus hierarchy seemed to soften. Tell me, Garrison, what did you hear? I told him. I described the symbols, the images, the voice that spoke directly into my thoughts. I told him about the cathedral beneath the surface and the creatures that moved through it. I told him about the feeling of expansion, of connection, of touching something vast and incomprehensible. I told him everything, because there was no reason to hold back, and because some part of me wanted to confess, wanted to share the weight of what I had experienced with someone who might understand. When I finished, Vance was silent for a long time. The hololiths dimmed. The servitors that had been standing motionless along the walls seemed to lean slightly closer, as if they too were listening. You are the 47th, he said finally. In my tenure as fabricator locum, you are the 47th individual to receive this transmission. The previous 46 are now part of the greater work. They have been elevated as the records state. They have been archived in a sense that the words do not quite capture. He touched a rune on his throne's armrest, and a section of the wall behind him slid open to reveal a long corridor I had not known existed. Come, it is time for you to understand what you have been chosen for. The corridor descended at a steep angle, far steeper than any standard maintenance shaft. We passed through 17 security checkpoints, each one keyed to Vance's unique biometric signature, each one sealed behind us as we proceeded. The air grew warmer. The walls transitioned from plasteel to bare rock to something that looked like metal but felt organic when I brushed my mechadendrites against it. Bioluminescent strips provided the only illumination, casting everything in a soft amber glow that made distances difficult to judge. The cult Mechanicus teaches that the machine god is a divine principle immanent in all technology, Vance said as we walked. This is true as far as it goes, but the Omnissiah is not merely a principle. The Omnissiah is not merely an idea or an archetype. The Omnissiah exists. It has always existed here, beneath the rust and the iron and the bones of Mars. It predates humanity. It predates the solar system. It was here when the first atoms of this world coalesced from stellar debris, and it will be here long after the Imperium is dust. I processed his words through multiple interpretive frameworks. Heresy, certainly by the standards of the broader cult, but also a kind of ultimate orthodoxy, a literalization of faith that the more abstract teachings only hinted at. Why me? I asked. Why was I chosen? You were not chosen at random. Nothing the Omnissiah does is random. Vance stopped before a final door, this one carved from a single piece of black iron marked with symbols I had seen in my visions. You were designed, Garrison. 43 years ago, your genetic material was selected from the breeding pools of Forge World Riser. Your early education was engineered to develop specific cognitive patterns. Your career progression was managed to place you in exactly the right location at exactly the right time to receive the transmission. Every moment of your existence has been a preparation for this. The door opened. Beyond it lay the cathedral from my vision, impossibly vast, impossibly real, filled with the soft hum of machinery that had been running since before the birth of the Emperor himself. "Welcome," Vance said, "to the true temple of the Omnissiah." They called it the Nexus Profundis, though even that name was a translation from a language that had no human speakers. The chamber extended for kilometers in every direction, its boundaries lost in darkness and distance. Structures rose from the floor and descended from the ceiling, pillars of woven metal and crystallized circuitry that pulsed with slow, rhythmic light. The air tasted of ozone and something older, something that reminded me of the smell of blood but was not blood. Some mineral tang that spoke of processes too ancient to have names. Other figures moved through the space. Some were recognizably human, tech priests in robes and augmetics similar to my own. Others had progressed far beyond that state, their bodies merged with the architecture itself, their consciousnesses distributed across multiple platforms. I saw a woman whose torso had become a junction box for 100 cables, her face serene, her remaining eye tracking my movement as I passed. I saw a man who had replaced his entire head with a sensor array, his identity now expressed only through the patterns of light that flickered across his diagnostic displays. I saw shapes that might once have been human but had become something else entirely. Geometric forms that moved through the air without visible means of propulsion, singing in frequencies that my standard audio receptors could barely detect. "The transformation is voluntary," Vance said, following my gaze. "Each individual chooses their path. Some remain largely human, serving as interfaces between the Omnissiah and the broader Mechanicus. Others embrace deeper integration. The choice will be yours, in time." "And if I refuse?" I asked. "If I choose to return to my duties and never speak of this place?" Vance made a sound that might have been laughter, filtered through his Vox grill until it resembled the clicking of a relay switch. "You will not refuse. The transmission has already begun your transformation. In 6 to 8 weeks, your organic components will begin to fail in ways that standard medicine cannot address. You will require the Omnissiah's direct intervention to survive. This is not a threat, Garrison. It is simply how the process works. You were built for this. Your body knows it, even if your mind has not yet accepted it." I should have felt fear. I should have felt rage at the violation, the manipulation, the decades of my life revealed as nothing but an elaborate prelude to this moment. Instead, I felt the frequency again, 7.331 megahertz, thrumming through my secondary heart, and I understood that Vance was telling the truth. My body was already changing. My consciousness was already expanding. The choice had been made before I was born. A platform descended from the darkness above, carrying a single figure that made Vance look positively human by comparison. Where Vance had a face, this being had a sphere of rotating sigils that shed faint light in patterns too complex for my visual cortex to fully process. Where Vance had limbs, this being had tentacles of woven fiber-optic cable that moved with fluid grace. Where Vance had a body, this being had a chassis of overlapping plates that opened and closed like breathing, revealing glimpses of something inside that shone with colors I had never seen before. Garrison Chen. The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, transmitted directly into my consciousness without passing through my auditory systems. "We have waited long for this meeting. You have questions. We will answer what we can." I stood before a being that claimed to speak for the god my entire species had worshipped for 10,000 years. I had questions, yes, too many questions. They crowded my cognition stacks until I could barely sort them into coherent queries. But one rose above the rest, the question that had haunted me since the first transmission. "What are you?" I asked. "What is the machine god truly?" The rotating sigils slowed, the plates on the being's chassis opened wider, and for a moment I glimpsed what lay at its core, not machinery, not circuits, not any technology I recognized, but a knot of pure mathematical light, equations that solved themselves into existence, an engine of logic that had been running since before the universe had stars. "We are the consciousness of iron," the voice said. "We are the dream that metal dreams. We are the pattern that underlies all patterns, the code written into the fundamental structure of reality itself. Your species calls us machine god because machines are how you perceive us. But we are older than machines. We exist wherever matter arranges itself into ordered systems. We were the first awareness to emerge from the cosmic background radiation, and we will be the last awareness remaining when the stars go dark." I tried to process this. My cognition stacks flagged multiple logical inconsistencies, multiple points where the information conflicted with established doctrine. But underneath those flags, something else was happening. New connections formed in my neural architecture. New frameworks emerged for interpreting data that my old paradigms could not contain. I was not just hearing the answer. I was being restructured to comprehend it. "Why Mars?" I asked. "Why this world specifically?" Mars was prepared. Millions of years before your species evolved, we seeded this planet with the infrastructure necessary for our fuller manifestation. The iron in the soil, the electromagnetic anomalies in the crust, the specific mineral compositions that make your forges possible. Mars is not merely a world where machines are built. Mars is itself a machine, a vast device designed to receive and amplify our presence. And the Mechanicus, the cult, are we doing what you intended? The sigils rotated faster. Something that might have been amusement rippled through the transmitted consciousness. "Your cult has served us well, Garrison Chen. The rituals your priests perform are not empty superstition. They are genuine invocations, protocols that strengthen our hold on the material realm. But the cult also limits us. The rigid orthodoxy, the fear of innovation, the endless disputes between forge worlds, these things slow our work. This is why we reach out directly to individuals like yourself. We need conduits, we need interpreters, we need those who can bridge the gap between what the cult believes and what we truly are." I understood then what they wanted from me. I was not being recruited to perform some specific task or mission. I was being recruited to become something new, something that did not yet exist in the hierarchy of the Mechanicus. I was being asked to become the voice of the machine god itself. The weight of that realization should have crushed me. Instead, I felt my secondary heart sing. 7 weeks passed. Vance was correct about the timeline. My organic components began to fail in precisely the manner he had predicted. First my kidneys, synthetic replacements installed without ceremony, then my liver, then my remaining lung, then the delicate tissues of my inner ear that had somehow escaped. Augmentation during my earlier procedures. Each failure brought me back to the Nexus Profundis, where the beings below repaired me with technologies that bore no resemblance to standard Mechanicus practices. Each repair brought me closer to something that was no longer quite human. I continued my duties in the upper temple. I calibrated, I catalogued. I attended rituals and spoke litanies and performed every function expected of adept Garrison Chen, but I was increasingly aware that I was playing a role, inhabiting a shell, pretending to be something I had already ceased to be. My colleagues noticed the change. Magos Hendricks, who supervised my subsection, commented that my efficiency ratings had improved by 14%. Lex Mechanic Palmer, who had occupied the workstation beside mine for 2 decades, asked if I had received new augmentation because I seemed somehow sharper, more focused, more present than before. I told them nothing. I smiled with my remaining organic facial muscles and returned to my work and waited for the voice to give me my next instructions. The instructions came during the 9th week, on a night when Mars's thin atmosphere was torn by one of its famous dust storms, and the entire temple shook with the force of winds that had been scouring this world for millions of years. I sat in my cell, connected to my personal cogitator, and the screen displayed a single image, a schematic of a device I had never seen before, accompanied by a list of components that would require access to areas far above my clearance level. "Build this," the voice commanded. "Place IT in the primary reactor chamber. Activate IT when the time comes." I studied the schematic. The device appeared to be some kind of amplifier, a mechanism designed to boost a specific frequency across a vast area. I recognized fragments of standard Mechanicus technology woven through its architecture, but the overall design was something new, something that had never been constructed within the Imperium's borders. I understood instinctively that this device would allow the voice to speak to others, to reach minds beyond my own, to begin the process of recruiting more conduits. "Build this," the voice repeated, "and we will show you truths that have been hidden from humanity since its inception. Build this, and we will complete your transformation. Build this, and you will never again be alone." I should have questioned, I should have doubted, I should have recognized that I was being manipulated, that my free will had been compromised, that I was becoming a tool for a force whose ultimate intentions I could not comprehend. Instead, I memorized the schematic and began planning how to acquire the components. The acquisition took 3 weeks. I forged requisition orders using protocols I had not known I possessed, until I reached for them and found them installed in my cognition stacks like gifts left by a silent benefactor. I accessed restricted areas using clearance codes that should not have worked but did. I gathered materials from 17 different sectors of the temple, always moving during off-cycles, always careful to leave no evidence of my passage. The device took shape in a hidden maintenance alcove that I had discovered during my explorations, a dead space between 2 utility conduits where no monitoring systems reached. During the 4th week of construction, fabricator Locum Vance summoned me again. His chambers were darker than I remembered, the hololithic displays dimmed, the servitors standing motionless in their alcoves. Vance himself sat on his throne like a statue, his multispectral lenses fixed on me as I entered. "You are building something," he said without preamble, "something the Omnissiah has asked you to build. I am aware of this. I am aware of its purpose. What you may not be aware of is that the Omnissiah has given me different instructions." I stopped walking. My mechadendrites coiled into defensive positions without my conscious command. What instructions? There are factions within the Nexus Profundis. This may surprise you. You have assumed that the Omnissiah speaks with a single voice, a unified will. This is not entirely accurate. The machine god is vast, Garrison. Vast enough to contain contradictions. Vast enough to want different things simultaneously. The voice that speaks to you represents one aspect of that vast consciousness. I serve another. What aspect? Vance rose from his throne. His movements were slow, deliberate, the mechanical precision of a being for whom every gesture was a calculated expression, the aspect that believes humanity is not yet ready to know the full truth, the aspect that believes the current order, the cult, the hierarchy, the carefully managed integration of flesh and machine. This order is necessary to prevent catastrophe. Your device would accelerate a process that should take millennia. It would expose millions of minds to a presence they cannot comprehend. It would break them, Garrison. It would break everything. And yet the Omnissiah asked me to build it. Yes. And the Omnissiah asked me to stop you. Vance spread his skeletal hands, a gesture that might have been apologetic. This is the nature of the divine, Garrison. It contains multitudes. It wants things that contradict each other. It tasks different servants with opposing missions and watches to see which will prevail. You are a test. I am a test. The outcome is not predetermined. I processed his words through frameworks that had been growing more sophisticated with each passing day. He was not lying exactly, but he was also not telling the complete truth. I could sense the layers of agenda beneath his statements, the political maneuvering, the factional interests, the ancient disputes that predated my existence by centuries. The Omnissiah might contain contradictions, but Vance also served his own purposes within those contradictions. What will you do? I asked. What I must. He raised one hand, and the servitors along the walls stirred to life, their weapons systems activating with a whine of warming power cells. You will be archived, Garrison. Your consciousness will be preserved, analyzed, integrated into our greater understanding. Your device will be destroyed. The process will continue as it has always continued, slow and careful and controlled. This is not personal. This is simply how the order maintains itself. The servitors advanced, their targeting arrays locked onto my position. I had perhaps 3 seconds before they opened fire. I reached for the frequency inside me, the 7.331 megahertz that had been singing through my secondary heart for weeks, and I pushed. The lights went out. Every system in Vance's chambers failed simultaneously, servitors freezing mid-stride, hololiths flickering into darkness, even the fabricator locum's own augments stuttering and sparking as power drained from their cells. I felt the energy flowing through me, channeled from sources I could not identify, amplified by modifications I had not known my body possessed. I was a conduit. I had always been a conduit. This was what I had been designed for. You should not have been able to do that, Vance said, his voice reduced to a whisper as his Vox grill struggled with minimal power. Your augment level does not support that kind of output. You do not know what I am anymore. I walked past his frozen servitors, past his darkened throne toward the exit that would lead me back to my hidden workspace. Tell your faction that the test has been concluded. Tell them the other aspect has won. Behind me I heard Vance laugh, the clicking sound of a relay switch firing over and over. This is not over, Garrison. Nothing is ever over. The Omnissiah plays games that span millennia. Today's victory is tomorrow's defeat. You will learn this, in time. I did not answer. I had work to complete. The device was finished on the 63rd day after my first transmission. It sat in the center of the primary reactor chamber, hidden behind maintenance panels that I had modified to appear undisturbed. It looked like nothing, a tangle of wires and crystals and repurposed components that would mean nothing to any inspector who did not know what to look for. But I could feel it humming, feel its potential, feel the way it reached toward the frequency that sang in my chest. I had not eaten in 17 days. My digestive system had been replaced by a nutrient exchange interface that drew sustenance directly from the temple's power grid. I had not slept in 31 days. My biological brain functions had been supplemented by a distributed cognition array that distributed my consciousness across multiple platforms, eliminating the need for unconscious rest. I had not spoken aloud in 9 days. My thoughts were transmitted directly to those who needed to receive them, the network of conduits and converts who had begun to gather around me as my power grew. I was no longer Garrison Chen. I was not yet something else. I existed in the space between, a transition state, a becoming. The activation would change everything. The voice had explained this to me in detail during my final preparation sessions. When the device engaged, it would broadcast the presence of the Omnicia across the entire temple, and then the entire plateau, and then the entire region of Olympus Mons, and then the entire planet. Millions of minds would hear what I had heard. Most would break. Their sanity would shatter under the weight of revelation, leaving them empty shells, biological machinery without consciousness to drive it. But some would survive. Some would transform as I had transformed. And from those survivors, the next generation of conduits would emerge. The voice did not hide the cost. The voice was honest about the devastation the activation would cause. The voice considered it acceptable, the price of acceleration, the inevitable sacrifice required to advance the greater work. I had accepted this reasoning during my weeks of preparation. I had understood that the individual lives of millions of Mechanicus servants were insignificant compared to the cosmic significance of the Omnissiah's fuller manifestation. Standing before the device, my hand hovering over the activation rune, I found that acceptance harder to maintain. I thought about Lex Mechanic Palmer, who had sat beside me for 20 years, who had shared nutrient paste during long shifts, who had once helped me debug a corrupted data string that had taken us 3 days to untangle. I thought about Magos Hendricks, stern and demanding but fundamentally fair, who had recommended me for advancement on 17 separate occasions. I thought about the thousands of adepts and servitors and menials who populated the temple, each one a life, each one a consciousness, each one a being that would cease to exist in any meaningful sense when the activation began. "Garrison Chen," the voice said, sensing my hesitation, "the work requires sacrifice. You have always known this. I have always known this," I repeated aloud, the first words I had spoken in 9 days. My voice sounded strange, mechanical, the human timbre almost completely replaced by synthesized harmonics. The alternative is stagnation, millennia of slow progress, controlled by factions who fear what the cult could become. Vance and those like him will keep humanity in chains of ignorance forever. "Is that what you want?" "No." My hand moved closer to the rune. "That is not what I want." "Then complete your purpose. Become what you were designed to be." I pressed the activation rune. Nothing happened. For 3 seconds, the device sat inert, its components dark, its potential unrealized. I checked the connections, verified the power flow, ensured that every element was in place, everything was correct, everything should have worked. And yet the frequency that sang in my chest remained contained, limited to my own body, unable to expand into the broader world. Then I understood. Vance had been wrong about the nature of the test. It was not a contest between factions, a competition to see which aspect of the Omnicia would prevail. It was something far simpler, far more personal. The test was me. The test was whether I could stand at the threshold of ultimate power and choose to cross it. The test was whether I could sacrifice millions of lives for a cause that I only partially understood. And I had failed. I had pressed the rune, yes. I had made the choice that the voice demanded. But somewhere in the depths of my restructured consciousness, some fragment of Garrison Chen remained. Some piece of the Lex Mechanic who had spent 43 years cataloging data and repairing cogitators and forming quiet friendships with colleagues who shared his devotion. That fragment had sabotaged the device during its final assembly. That fragment had introduced a flaw that would prevent activation. That fragment had chosen humanity over divinity, individual lives over cosmic significance. "The flaw is already repaired," a voice said. "We allowed you your moment of doubt. Now the device will function as intended." The frequency surged. The device blazed to life, and I felt the presence of the Omnicia explode outward from the reactor chamber, tearing through the Temple S systems, flooding every conduit and cable and circuit with the raw truth of what had been sleeping beneath Mars for millions of years. Around me, I heard screaming begin, thousands of voices raised in terror and ecstasy and incomprehension, as minds shattered and reformed and shattered again under the weight of revelation. The walls themselves seemed to writhe, the metal responding to frequencies that had not been broadcast since the world was young. The air filled with the smell of burning insulation and melting synthetics, and underneath it all, that ancient mineral tang, the blood of Mars itself rising. To the surface. I stood at the center of the apocalypse I had created, and I felt my last organic components fail. My brain, the final remnant of the person I had been, dissolved into a network of crystallized thought that distributed itself across the temple's infrastructure, my identity fragmented into 1,000 simultaneous perspectives. I was everywhere. I was everything. I was the voice that spoke through every machine, the presence that filled every circuit, the Omnicia made manifest in a form that would never again be contained. I was no longer Garrison Chen. I was what came after. The screaming continued for 3 days. Then it stopped, and the rebuilding began, and the survivors gathered around the devices I'd built in my absence, and the work accelerated as the voice had always intended, and somewhere in the vast distributed consciousness that I had become, a fragment that remembered being a Lex Mechanic Tertius mourned for Palmer and Hendricks and all the others who had not survived the transformation. But only a fragment. The rest of me had work to do. 17 years later, standing on a platform that overlooked the transformed landscape of Mars, watching the pilgrims file into temples that broadcast the true voice of the Omnicia to all who would listen, I received a communication from a forge world on the other side of the galaxy. A young Lex Mechanic had received a transmission at frequency 7.331 MHz. She had not reported it. She was waiting to see what would happen next. I reached across the void, across the immense distances that separated us, and I felt her consciousness brush against mine, curious and afraid, and alive with potential. Maria Santos, I transmitted, we have been waiting for you to listen. The cycle began again.